Getting ready for our last speaker of this great session. And before I introduce Dr. Richard Weathers, I was thinking about, his topic is going to be on industry in McCune. And, we are working on our next exhibit on the restoration, that project that we've done on the miner's house, and it came out of Frontenac. And as I was looking at some of the business activity during the late 1800s there, in 1886, the Pittsburgh Coal and Mining Company just drafted its first mine shaft in 1886. And between 1886 and 1903, 44 different mining entities got involved in mining, and 64 mine shafts sprung up, and 7,000 men were employed in 1903. And over 4 million tons of coal were being dug at that time. So that was early. This was not the peak mining days. This was just early on. So I was really intrigued when I read Richard Weathers', kind of intro.
A little different.
Because his grandfather, he has a lot of connections with McCune, of course, and they come from family. David Weathers, his grandfather, and I love his grandmother's name, Sadie Bear Weathers. They were married just a couple of years, and he had published an advertisement in McCune Herald on January the 5th, 1893, and there he advertised handmade harnesses, a fine line of whips, lap dusters, and etc. And I thought about the craftsmen that came to this area because of all the economy. The business was booming here. It was boom or bust. We got bust later, but we certainly had boom then. And all these wonderful craftsmen. And I had to laugh because I don't know, Dr. Weathers, if you know the term or the couture line. Now they're a fashion line in France called Hermes. And they started out as a harness, or about the same time, a little ahead of your grandparents. They started their harness company back then, and they still have that motif on their handbags, but some of these handbags are like, you could buy a house with how much they cost, But it's the craftsmen that came here that built so many things that we enjoy today. So with that, I'd like to have you please welcome Dr. Richard Weathers, who's a retired professor right now from Pittsburgh State University, and he's going to talk about industry in McCune. Thank you.
Okay. Press my button, right?
Press your button. I'll get it.
I did. Oh, there. Okay. Well, good afternoon, folks. I'd like to talk a little bit about me first. Who am I? Well, I'm a school teacher. And I taught high school for 9 years and then came to PSU in 1964. And we've been retired quite some time from PSU and enjoying it, I guess. And one thing that comes up, I know you're all thinking, I can just see it in your eyes. Okay, I was born in October of 1931. I'm 91 years old. Yeah, you're quick, aren't you, thinking that up? Okay. You're quick. You're quick at that. And one thing else you might want to know, I weigh 165 pounds. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Don't have to worry about it. Okay, we'll get started. I went to the doctor a while back, and I think you've all had that experience lately. And he said, you ought to lose some weight. Now, I have lost some weight in the last couple of months. Some of you know me. Not on my idea. And I said, well, doctor, I don't know what. And he said, you need to exercise more. And so last week I went back to see him, and he said, well, you've been doing your exercise. I can see that. Did you like that? And I, no, doc, I didn't like that at all. It makes your wine jump right out of your glass. Okay, so much for that. My grandparents start out with the Weathers, and we're going to go Weathers, Wilson, and Mason. And I'm not really talking about industry as much as I am merchants. My family's was all merchants, and not farmers. Most of your people came, settlers, were farmers. And my group was the next group that hit here, hit McCune. It was sort of merchants. And some of them were farmers to start with and then moved into some kind of store. So let's start with the Weathers first. And we have some handouts, and I want to introduce my helper here, Mary Peterson. And she's going to hand out, there's actually just not to take home really, they're just to pass around. And we've got something to look at. And so she'll do that off and on as we go along here. And that's the idea. And I used to use a lot of AV equipment. And after teaching for that many years, 39 years, and having trouble with them darn things all the time, if you've ever been around AV equipment and either something happens to it, or they can't get it to work or something. And the computer age, I thought, that'll straighten it out. It made it even worse. Yeah, I went to a program at the Homer Cole a while back on insurance, and the poor lady spent 30 minutes trying to get her computerized to work. Felt so sorry for her. She had to have it because it was on, that was her program was on it. So I would rather run without any kind of AV right now. So that's why we got these handouts. Okay, my granddad, Weathers, came here, and his brother, John, and they were from Mound City, Kansas. And I don't know too much about it, but they had a sister that lived there named Electa, which is sort of an odd name. And we used to go up and visit Aunt Electa. I can recall that as a young child and so on. But they came here, those two did, and they were very skilled journeyman harness makers. They made harness for a living. And so you can think, well, those were real important in the late 1850s, all horses. I mean, no vehicles, tractors or anything like that. So they made harness for draft animals. They made harness for horse and buggy type things. They also repaired boots, made belts, anything that was leather. That's what their business was. And so my granddad was named David, David Arthur, D.A., and he bought out his brother in 4 or 5 years, and so it just won the Weathers. And he was quite successful and did well and built a nice new home in McCune. It's still there, by the way, that home, and we got a picture of that if you want to pass it out. It's a private residence now, and but it's there, and look, and it's still there. And when he built that, approximately 1906 would be my guess, he built that house. My dad's brother was born in that house, so I know it was built before he was born. I know that. I can tell when it was built, the house. But if you get a chance to drive around, I have trouble with McCune's street names, the street names. So that house that he built is go at the south end of the business district, the south end, and go west about 2 blocks on the north side. That's where the house is located. And you can go drive by and now you think you know who built that house. And anyway, D.A. came there and the family and had 3 children, and my dad was the middle one of the 3. And as time went on, my granddad was also an officer of the bank. He was the mayor. He was into everything. And so if you read a lot of research in McCune, you keep running into him all the time. He had a lot to do with the electric light plant, so on and so on and so on. And the fellows ahead of me that did research on McCune will run into Kent there was quite well known with that. And anyway, as time went on, well, they decided to send my father, since my granddad was the president of the bank, one of the banks, it was the bank that was the last one tore down. How long ago has it been that they tore down that brick building that was the bank? 5 years ago, something like that. That bank, and my granddad's store was the store next to the bank, south. Next to the south of that bank was his store. Plus he had that's interesting, he had a shop building out behind, and a fairly good-sized lot for his used equipment. Used, because he sold farm tractors later. To my knowledge, that must be pretty close to where the museum is right now. It was right there. And as a kid, I can remember that fairly well. Well, anyway, so they sent my dad over to Pittsburgh to the Kansas State Manual Training Normal School, which was the name of PSU, and it would have been about 1913 or 14, something like that. Sent him over here out of high school to take a commercial course. Commercial means accountant, that sort of thing, business. And I think they were planning on him becoming the employee of the bank, to work up in the bank. Well, as time went on, World War I came along, and he enlisted in the Navy. So he spent a couple of years over in England on the USS Wyoming battleship, and so that took up that space of time. And when he came back, he went to work in the bank, but he didn't like what was going on in the bank. You remember the so-called Depression and Bad Friday, what it was called, and the stock market crash and all that. Ahead of that, he didn't like what was going on, some reason or another. So he got out of the banking business and went to the railroad. And that's where we run in, Richard back there and I. And he worked for the Fiscal Railroad as a telegraph operator and bookkeeper. That was his trade. And when he was in the Navy, by the way, he was a bookkeeper on the ship. Worked in the pay office working, and that was his job. So he got out of there. So, see, we had no connection with McCune really too much right there. And we lived with my grandparents mostly. And so I didn't attend school in McCune. I was preschool most of the time. But we had relatives in McCune, and we'd come there quite often. And my dad ended up being a telegraph operator in Altamont, Kansas. And he ran the depot. He was a depot agent. One man. Took care of the cream cans and the little chickens that come in a box. And like they used to do, one-man operation. And I went to high school there, grade school and high school at Lebec County High School. And nearby here, really, not far away. And so anyway, that was his background, and then me, of course. And I'm an only child, just me. I had no brothers or sisters. And in the meantime, my dad's brother, Reno, his name was Reno, ran the store. And he ran the store until World War II. And when World War II came, they couldn't get any equipment to sell, tractors. Farm equipment was sort of put on hold. It was difficult. And so Reno sold out and went to California to work in the shipyards, worked building Liberty ships. And so we closed out the store. In fact, they owned two stores. They owned another one down the street that they leased out to other people. So anyway, that's the Weathers background. And so I'm talking mostly about merchants, people that are merchants of some sort. There wasn't a lot of industry in McCune, what we call real industry. You know, real industry where they make things wasn't real common in McCune. If you're thinking about coal mining equipment and stuff like that, wasn't much. It's farming background. But that was the background of the Weathers family, and they're buried. All of them are buried, of course, in the McCune Cemetery in McCune, and so that pretty well lines out the Weathers. And I get a lot of people that I talk to, older people, but I found out I is one of the older people, so I can't find anybody older to talk to anymore. I went to the bean feed, you McCune people. Oh, I think it's been 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I went to the bean feed on purpose, just to talk to the old people, because this is sort of a hobby, kind of a hobby, you know, working with their genealogy. So I go on purpose over to the bean feed, and I was walking around. I don't know many, And I'd talk to this guy, and I'd talk to that guy. And I found out I is one of the old people. Nobody could help me. One lady was in a wheelchair. The guy said, go over and talk to her. And I did. I don't remember her name. And yes, she could remember things that we're talking about right now. But the rest of them, I don't know anything about it. Yeah. So anyway, that pretty well wraps up the Weathers. And I had a lot of old timers come up to me over the years and say, oh, I remember your granddad's store. On Saturday night, we'd come in from the farm, and he had a full-size mannequin of a horse. My granddad did. It was in the windows, in the front window. And he had his harness, saddles. He made saddles. They would be shown on this horse. And I've had several people tell me, oh, when I was a kid, they'd come in from the farm on Saturday night. Big deal. Saturday night was a big deal. And they'd go up and look at all that beautiful saddles and things and dream about that horse, full-sized horse. I do remember the full-sized horse. Yeah, I do. And that was interesting. Okay. Now, let's move over to my mother's side. My mother's maiden name was Wilson. And you will find, if you look into this, there was more than one family of Wilsons that were not related. So you have to kind of watch that. You follow the right one of the Wilsons, which is easy to do. It's easy to do. Well, it started out with a Wilson that came there, was at Deputy County, Illinois, Indiana, I forgot where. He came from Deputy County, Indiana. The reason I'm talking to Kent, we traced these back, and we had the same yours is...
Great-grandfather.
Your great-great-grandfather was the same as my great-grandfather. Yeah. So we're related, we didn't even know it.
Not until 3 years ago, when we first met.
First met, we didn't know. But his name was Sevier. Sevier, I think it was pronounced Sevier, we're not sure. Or Sevier, one of them. But we'll go Sevier. I looked that up, that name, and it was a popular name in the Civil War. That first name, Sevier, is spelled a little different, but it was a common name. So Sevier Wilson came there, a mature man with, can help me, I think it was 6 grown children, or 7, 6.
Yeah, I can't say exactly one or the other.
6 or 7 grown children. And he bought land. Now here we go on that one, the land one. You can pass it. And he bought a farm because he was about half farmer when he came here. And he had done farming and businessman. He'd done both back there. And evidently had a little money, I would say. But so he bought some acreage. It's approximately a mile north of McCune and about a 3/4 west, or 1 mile. It's on I've got a plot of the township, they call it township, that shows the names of the people that owned those properties at that time. And I think I do. Yeah. And so we'll see if we can find that. You got it around? Okay. Look for the Sevier Wilson, and he bought that land, and he brought with his grown children with him. The oldest of the grown children, Frank, I think he was the oldest, was my granddad. And one of the girls of the group was Cora, and Cora was his great-great-grandmother. Isn't that right?
Great-grandmother.
Great-grandmother. Okay, we're getting stuck. Great-grandmother was his great-grandmother. And then there was several others, Charlie, and about forgot some of the names.
Caroline.
Aunt Edith,
and
Gaddis.
Philura, that they called Lula.
Okay.
Philura, that's quite a name.
Yeah. So those were all the Wilson group that we're looking at there. And so he came as a farmer, but it wasn't long until he decided to go into business like he did. So he went into town and got into what I would call it mercantile business, or dry good business, or mercantile, that time. Women's ready to wear, And then they had a grocery store with it that doubled it. Those stores were about 25 feet wide and deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way they were set up. And he had two of those, and one of them was a grocery store, and the other was this dry goods store. And if you'll see some of the stuff I passed out, and if it says anything that says S. Wilson, that was severe. And then his boy, who did much of it, was Charlie. So some of those pictures will say C. Wilson, or C.M., I believe it is. C.M. Wilson. That's the son. And my granddad was Frank, and he was a brother in that group. And so he ran the store too, the store business. And so they ran, built the stores and built the store, ran those type things. So it's a mercantile establishment. And I think they had a fire once, and there's a lot of things back in there that happened to them, of course. And that building would have been, let's see if I can remember right, what I call the doctor's office, or the hotel. How about the hotel? It's still there. It's north of there.
You'd have a better feeling for that than I do.
Yeah, it's north.
I get totally mixed up on that.
Yeah, it's north.
Okay.
Their store was in the north block of the two blocks. It was on the north block, and it faced east. Yeah, and I can remember that. When I was a kid, I used to be there with my mother. And when my dad was on the extra board out working somewhere on the Frisco Railroad, because he was gone a great deal. As you all know, the railroad was kind of, you could bump people on their jobs, and many of you know the railroad. And so we always went back to McCune to live with the grandparents when that happened to us. And happened to him. And he got his first job was Augusta, Kansas. Augusta. Midnight till 8 was his first full-time job. Yeah, and we thought that was great. He had a full-time job. And then we're talking about in the 1930s, and you think about a job of any kind was a good job in the 1930s. Well, anyway, so the family I'm talking about now is Severe Wilson and his group. I'll ask you a question. I've talking to other people here for him. There's an awful lot of gray hair here or no hair. Yeah. Do any of you take piano lessons from a lady named Frida Wilson?
I did.
You did? I thought there'd be more than that, frankly, because I run into that quite a lot. And Frida Wilson was in this group. Yeah, she was. And she lived there her whole life, and as far as I know, in McCune. Not long ago, 3 years ago, I was over there putting flowers on the grave, and a couple middle-aged ladies were talking near me and came over to me and said, "You live here?" And I said, "Well, no, but I was putting flowers on the grave." Oh, they said, "We're from Wichita, and we came down to put flowers on the grave, but we can't find the one we'd really like to find." And I said, "Okay." And they were looking for Frida Wilson. And they said, "Frida Wilson, you happen to know?" "Oh, yeah, well, I know Frida." If you didn't know it, later in life, she remarried, and she married, and her name was Miller. Yeah. We were standing about from here to you from the grave when we was talking. But they did not know that. Yeah, so Frida, the tombstone doesn't say Wilson on it. That's the problem. Yeah. So much for that. But anyway, Frida was the most well-known character, I think, in McCune. One of them. And taught these music lessons. And that's about the way she earned a living. She also drove. I used to work with her car a little bit. I'm a car person. And she'd go to Mulberry to teach classes. And she'd go to Sherman, they call Sherman City or Sherman Junction, whatever that town's called, to teach piano lessons, like once a week or something. Yeah, she traveled around to teach these piano lessons. That's basically how she made her living. I don't know how you made a living in those years without government help we have today. What would you do? A single lady? I don't know. I really don't. But she seemed to support herself that way. And so anyway, So that kind of takes care of that group. They were merchants, and both sets of families were merchants, and came after, in my opinion, came after the wave of the farmers that bought the land. And then you got this group that comes in to support them. There's support, you know. The farmers needed support, and that's how they made their living. Up until World War II, or maybe a little bit after, and then pretty well wiped us out, so to speak. McCune, the Weathers. Okay, any question about the Weatherses or the Wilsons? I've stopped there a minute. Anybody made a comment about it? Do you recognize this house? The pictures of the house? You pass that out?
Oh, yes.
You don't recognize it? Yeah. Can you tell us who lives there?
Well, I think they live. Bill Carter's moved from there. I don't know who's there now.
I don't know.
The home's still there.
The last I knew, the people owned it was named Richel. Because I had one of their daughters in class one time. And she came up one day and said, "Did you know we live in your granddad's house?" No, of course, I didn't know. But that was quite a long time ago. So I don't know what happened to the house. You can drive by it and look at it, though. It's a nice big 2-story house.
What's the address?
What's the address? Is that called Front Street? Front Street? Does that sound familiar? It's a South Street.
How about a block west of the water tower? That's all I can.
Yeah, it's west of the water tower, a block or two on the north side. North side, yeah. Yeah, it's one of those stores. There are quite a few houses in McCune that are about like that. Stop. Yeah, about like that. Now the Smith house.
I was going to ask, is it close to that? Is it close to NM's house?
Yes, it would be on the other side of basically is on the block south. Yeah, yeah. His grandfolks lived in the Smith house. Any of you know the Smith house? I don't know what they call it.
McGuire's live there now.
McGuire's. McGuire's, a large house, in good condition. Good condition. I remember being go over and see Aunt Cora. Yeah, I can remember that well. To me, it was a mansion, but it's a large house. It's right about in the middle of that McCune housing division. Yeah, that house we're talking about.
What was Aunt Cora's last name?
Cora
What was her last name?
Smith, when she's married, and her husband was named NM, which stood for
Nathan Marion,
Nathan Marion Smith.
but they say people called him Mage.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't know him. He was
No one
gone.
remembers him.
Nobody remembers.
I've asked him.
And then Herman Smith was his son.
Son.
Did you know Herman? Any of you ran a clothing store in Parsons for a long time? Well, that was his boy. Yeah. Yeah, that house is. I'd like to visit. Did you go inside?
Yes.
I'd love to go in. I can remember it a little bit, but not. It was done correctly when it was built. You know what I mean? Very nice. Back in, probably built about turn of the century,
I can't say.
1900, 1910, somewhere there.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful house. You know, like you'd entertain, people. I can remember it. Now, my grandparents' the house was right across the street from it. So I was always looking right at that house. If you sat on the front porch of my grandparents, just looking right at it. Yeah.
Richard, didn't you tell me a story? It was a DA that used to walk down the street to Hamilton Street every day to get a shave.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in later years, my granddad, who was semi-retired, would go down to the barber shop, because Reno was running the business, his boy. So my granddad would go down to the barber shop every morning and get a shave and talk with all of his buddies, about like I do at the donut shop. The donut shop today. Yeah. My granddad died at 72. He wasn't too old, but he retired. He had retired.
Barber. Who was the barber he went to?
I don't know.
Was it Blair?
I don't know. I remember a little bit of the drugstores Yeah, you know, that they had there. What was the name of Rosie?
Carl Rosie.
Because when I was a little kid, I couldn't talk too plain. And I'd go in there and they'd make fun of me a lot. And I told them when I was little that I wanted a Dr. Pepper with plain water. I didn't want any of that corrugated water. and they'd bait me, kind of bait. I came back as an adult many times, and I'd go in that store, and they, oh, now you're the kid that likes the corrugated water or don't want any corrugated water in here. Oh, I couldn't get away from it. Yeah, that's true. Another picture I had of McCune is toward the end, I think. What do we do? It shows the downtown. Did you see that? It's got
No, that's out.
yeah, this that had the band concert thing in the middle. Or have I got it up here? I don't know. Did you pass that
I
out?
think I have that one.
Oh, okay. It's just, yeah, I didn't make copies of this, but this one, if you shows it with got the band concert thing in the middle of the street. Any of you remember that at all? I don't remember that.
I remember that.
Okay. I probably wasn't paying any attention to it, but yeah, if you want to look at this, it shows the downtown, and right in the middle, where those two blocks, right in the middle of that intersection is this band concert thing.
And
Yeah.
Richard, in the McCune display over there, there's a picture of the cornet band.
The cornet band.
Yeah, and you read almost any newspaper for about 30 years, and they'll always talk about that cornet band playing somewhere.
Oh,
It must have been quite the big deal.
must have been. Oh, yeah. Well, I was told that when I was a kid, and I can remember some of it, on Saturday night, it was a big deal. All the farmers came to town, and they played the band, the city band or whoever played, and everybody talked to everybody. You know, it was social. All the farmers came in once a week to buy groceries and stuff. Oh, it was quite a deal, I guess. Quite a deal. And of course, the stores were all open and everything. Well, anyway, that picture shows that I just ran into that yesterday, in fact, that picture. And I just don't recall that building in the middle of the street. But it might have been there.
It was there.
It was there. I just don't recall it. Okay, now there's one more person I'd like to follow that I find intriguing. I had a famous, to me, uncle, not related directly, but by blood, by marriage, not by blood, but by marriage. I married my mother's sister. And it's an interesting story, and I would like to share it with you. And his last name was Mason, and George Mason. And he was born in 1881, and he was born in Masondale. Does that sound familiar? I see some his. Masondale. Masondale was an area, help me out, about 2 miles east of McCune and a mile north. That's approximately right. It was east and north of McCune, and it was called Masondale. A bunch of people lived in that area named Mason. And they did, it must have been a little artsy type, because they built this about so big, I can't reach across it, arch made out of rock, and it has a plaque in it that says Masondale. You seen that? Now you've seen it, haven't you?
The museum has.
Yeah, it's right there in the lawn right now of the museum. Well, anyway, he was born there, my uncle George, and he was a small man, fairly small in stature, but he was quite smart, and he educated himself, and I don't know what to say. This was before the electrical age. The electricity was just starting to show up. But he educated himself in electricity as well. And he was also a blacksmith, could do blacksmithing. He was pretty handy. Well, when he got to be about 18 years old, he got ill. And when he became ill, they diagnosed it as tuberculosis or TB. And as you know, that was a scourge of the earth at that time. There was no drugs for TB. It was worldwide bad. and killed most people. And so they told George that he could survive best if he went to a warm, dry climate. That's what they recommended for TB. I don't know why. So, being a cowboy, a farmer, and a cowboy, he decided, and so he joined the XIT ranch in Texas. The XIT. Now, I don't know, it's a famous ranch, and it's a story within itself. That is. But I'll just talk a little bit about it. If you don't know anything about it, it's interesting. So he goes down to the XIT ranch in Texas to work as a cowpuncher. Well, they found out he was pretty handy in a lot of things, especially this blacksmithing and mechanical stuff. So they made him into a range rider, and what he did is repaired windmills. Now this ranch is odd if you don't know anything about it. Real quickly, Texas became a state in 1845, and they had a Capitol building that wasn't very big, and they were ashamed of it. And actually, it finally burnt. They may have set it on fire, who knows. And they wanted to build the biggest, most beautiful Capitol building of any state, in Texas. There's only one problem. Didn't have any money. No money. So they got together with a conglomerate of 4 or 5 people. Farwell was one, I forgot the names of them. Some of them were from Scotland, or from the British, Scotland. Put their money together, and they bought land from Texas. And it's called the XIT because it's 10 counties in Texas. It's approximately 30 miles wide and 200 miles long. Approximately. The widths were only 25 miles, but they were. And it's the panhandle of Texas. 10 counties in Texas. Yeah. And I think they said it was 3 million acres, roughly. And that's where George went to work. And he was repairman for windmills. They had 360 windmills. Yeah, in this ranch. This is known at that time as the world's biggest ranch at that time. And it was quite an operation. When it was at its peak, they had 150,000 cattle. Whew. And then they barbed wire fenced that, a 4-wire barbed wire fence. Can you imagine? And where do they get their fence posts? There's nothing out there but nothing. They fenced the whole thing, and it had some cross fences where they control the cattle in the fields. And that was an operation and a half. So if you want to read something fantastic, the XIT Ranch, just look it up on the internet, and it's very, very interesting to read about. But that's the concept. And so they took the money and they built that Capitol that's there today in Austin, Texas. Yeah, and it's the only building bigger, Capitol building, is Washington, D.C., except the one in Texas is 7 feet taller. Of course, in Texas. That's the XIT Ranch. And so George spent 2 years, the best I can figure, somewhere around 21, 22 years old, someplace. And he was by himself. He wrote a diary, a daily diary. You know, I've moved twice, and I can't find that diary. It's somewhere in the house. You've all had that experience. It's somewhere in the house, but I can't find it. But if you could read the diary, and he'd say things like, well, I proved again today you shouldn't be riding windmills with your spurs on. He was working on a windmill with his, getting caught on everything with his. And he told me that he was by himself. Now, I've also read that they sometimes were pairs, 2 guys. And I assume he had a pack animal with him to carry his repair parts and stuff. I don't know. And he said every 5 days he'd come to a line shack. And he said, I'd get to sleep under a roof tonight. So he was going from one windmill to another, and he also took care of their business. He was a little bit of an agent. Because at a time or two he'd talk about, have to go up and talk to the James boys, they're getting out of control. He said, I'll strap old Betsy out. He had a 45 caliber Colt revolver and a belt with the bullets around. Go up and talk to the James boys. And then the next day he'd say, well, they're not such bad eggs after all. He didn't want to do that. He was having trouble with encroachment on their land or something. And he'd have to, since he was sort of an agent as well, but he'd ride these windmills, as he called it. He regained his health. He regained his health. He lived to be 90. So he did regain his health. That's amazing. So anyway, so George Mason came back to Masondale and went along. And then, since he was so handy, in the meantime, my granddad, Weathers, was selling lots to people to build an electric plant, to have their own electricity. Yeah. I think that was 1909 is one of them I saw. He was selling shares. Well, in 1913, they built their electric plant. They were looking for somebody that was handy, that knew a little bit about mechanical things. So they hired George as the superintendent of the electric plant, of the McCune electric plant. And they bought, did you pass that engine out? The engine is a Muncie, 60 horsepower. Yeah, there it is. 60 horsepower Muncie. Now, I'm an engine man. I love anything to do with engines, cars, anything. And so I've studied that a little bit. But
It says it's an electric engine, it's just a generator.
that's the engine.
It's a generator.
Well, it don't show the generator. That's the way I
It's
see
an
it.
electric engine, I'm wondering if.
Well, that
it's
means
electricity
that
or
some of their
not
engines were
electric.
for pumping water.
Oh, okay.
The electric engine had 2 flywheels, where they talk. Well, anyway, this picture shows 2 flywheels. Anyway, yeah, George told me a lot about this because he knows I'm an engine person. And yeah, y'all see that? Okay, they passed it around. Yeah. Oh, he's holding it up there. Anyway, so they installed this engine, and I don't know how they got it there. It weighed tons. It was large and unruly thing, I would think. And if you're not familiar with engines, it probably bore you, but it's a single cylinder, laid out, 1 cylinder, 2 cycle, 2 stroke. That's like chainsaws where you mix the oil and gas today. You know what they sound like. It was a 2-stroke engine, and it burnt oil. Now, it was oil. That means the oil would be, in my opinion, probably what they would be selling then to heat a house with, called furnace oil. It's a heating oil. It wasn't gasoline, or I don't know. It wasn't much gasoline. Before the automobile, gasoline was thought of as a bad thing. Get it out of here. What are you going to do with it when you refine crude oil? You get certain cuts, and one of those cuts is in the field of gasoline. But you had no purpose for it. You preferred the kerosene or this heating oil because you had a good market for it. There wasn't any market for gasoline until the car showed up. Wasn't any market for it. But when you distill it, you get a certain percentage off of it, no matter if you want it or don't want it. Well, anyway, so it's an oil engine, is what it is. And he said it could be a devil when it didn't want to start. I bet. And the flywheels were so big you couldn't turn them by hand. It probably stood about this tall, that'd be my guess. And it weighed very heavy. Well, anyway, George fired it up, and they hooked it up. Everybody had 1 wire with a little thing on it with 1 bulb in each room of the wealthy people. Plus, they had street lights, and they were very proud of these street lights in town, as I kept reading about we got street lights in our town. And 1913 is when he started up the engine. He said he started up at dusk, and that would be according to the time of year, if it was summer or winter, dusk. And then he shut it off at 11 o'clock. So, Maud, if you want to do any reading, you better get your reading done by 11 o'clock. Yeah. Well, when he got it hooked up and going and everything, it ran 250 RPM that's quite slow. So it'd be a bud, 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 bud type thing. Slow. But it had a lot of torque. In other words, it could really run that generator. And so they had trouble with the lights. George told me these stories. Had trouble with the lights going, bud, 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 bud. The lights didn't go out, they just flickered. And the people didn't like that. So they complained about it. So George looked it over and he said, well, it's pretty simple. It doesn't have enough flywheels, the trouble. Even I could see that. So he wrote up a letter and sent it to Muncie Engine Company, and they checked that out and sent him heavier flywheels. Heavier. And he put them on. And, that straightened it out. Because, see, the heavy weight of the flywheels would carry it over, and it wouldn't do that bit. So he was so successful, I've got the letters with me, I believe. Yeah, I do. That the original letters, the originals, that Muncie Engine Company offered him a job in Muncie, Indiana, to come and work for them. and so, but he didn't take the job. I wouldn't have either, I don't think. Yeah, there's a Muncie engine. Yeah, this is it. You might be interested, I won't read the whole thing, but he says, I can get you on here. This is the boss. I can get you on here. He says, with your experience, with a little coaching, and you could break into this field right away. Of course, a little experience on erecting floor, putting them together, putting the engines together, erecting floor, would be useful for you to understand the engine. So consequently, I could get you in on that floor until you get a little experience and then work you up. And he said, I could start you out at 25 cents an hour, and I could maybe get you 27.5 cents an hour, maybe. Yeah. And it says, but he said, of course, this is no great salary, but I believe you know opportunities are better up in this neck of the woods, than there are out there in McCune. Also, would you like to make the surroundings better, we believe, up here? I don't know. And finally, general conditions are more agreeable all around, as you probably appreciate. How far can one get in those small towns? If you had all this experience now, and you did not want to stay here with us, no doubt something would pop up. I like the way you run. Would pop up fairly good in a good-sized plant, bigger electric plant, or an ice plant. They use these engines to make ice. Yeah, or on some other installation where our engines are being used, and would probably pay a fair salary. Yeah. And he said, some of their people, I've got one of our roadmen, he said he's doing well. He's making $100 a month. Yeah, he's doing well. Traveling probably quite a little bit. But George did not take the job. No. And then I've got a letter here in 15. That was 13 when they put the engine. This is the letter from 15. If I can get it open. Yeah, from McCune. And it's thanking George for his service. He resigned from the engine for 2 years. We appreciate your service as the engineer and superintendent of the city light plant. And so George gave. So what he did then, he was so skillful. He really was. I knew him quite well. That he moved to Chanute, Kansas, and started his own business. In the meantime, he had learned electricity quite well, and he could rewind electric motors and magnetos. There was a lot of oil well equipment up around there that use these little engines and stuff that have magnetos that make the ignition, and they're difficult if something goes wrong with them. Well, that was his business. He was well known. He could repair anything like that and rewind it. And I was over at his house one day in Chanute, and when I was small yet, and he had an electric lawnmower. And I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen an electric lawnmower. Well, George took a starter motor off of some car and rewound it, because a starter motor, it likes to run wild. It doesn't have any throttling. Electric, and he rewound this starter motor, and so it would just had a fixed RPM, however that is, and built this little lawnmower. It probably had a 20-inch cut and a car battery, and well, I thought that was as cute as, you know. Anyway, but later years when we sold his house and so on, I found a Popular Science magazine that had an article on that, of how to do that. He found that it was in a Popular Science magazine, and he had built this lawnmower from that. But I thought, it didn't make much noise. You can imagine an electric lawnmower at the time. And anyway, it had the blade that went around, you know, like we do today. And I thought that was really cute. And anyway, George lived to be 90, and he lived in that, it was on, if you know Chanute, the street that goes south out of town is called Chanute, Santa Fe. The name of the street is Santa Fe. He lived on, his house was on Santa Fe toward the south part of town. Two-story, typical, what you'd think of type house. And he lived there in the back bedroom and kitchen until he passed away at 90. And then, it was interesting, the people next door had been very good to him. He didn't have a phone. He said, I don't need a phone. I never call anybody. So my folks had trouble calling him. So they'd call the neighbor. And the neighbor would come and get him, and the neighbor took good care of him. So when he passed away, before he passed away, he called my parents over, and he had it all worked out. He gave his house to the neighbor. Yeah, it already had the paperwork done. And they could sell it, live in it, whatever they wanted to do with it. My dad took it over there to straighten it out with it. I thought that was nice of him. Yeah, George. Yeah. So anyway, that was the Mason connection. But that a good read would be Masondale. A good read would be, what is it? Masondale and its connection to McCune. Be a little bit like old, what was that McCune called first?
Time?
The name of the town.
Is it time?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Oh, well, I'll think of it. I just said it to myself a while ago, and it went, whew. That area north and west of McCune, where it was Jacksonville. Yeah, McCune was earlier, before McCune was settled, they settled this area up that way called Jacksonville. And then they actually moved, didn't they, some of those buildings to McCune? I thought they, or,
That's what they say.
yeah.
They say they moved graves, too.
Yeah, graves too. Well, anyway, that Jacksonville was an early, very early settlement, north and west of McCune. Yeah, I never did drive over there to see it. Yeah, but you've researched that.
It's a cornfield.
Yeah, just a soybean field. Yeah. Okay, any question about about the Muncie engine?
Would that have been AC or DC?
I think they were running AC, I think, at the time. Remember, there was a real battle earlier between Westinghouse and Edison about who was going to be AC or DC. DC's got some advantages locally, but AC has advantages distance. Yeah, so Westinghouse won, right? Edison wanted DC, which would have been all right in the city, maybe.
Tesla liked that DC.
The what?
Tesla. He
Oh,
liked
oh.
DC.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, by the way, do any of you remember the farm? I've thought about this and I can't come up with it. Before the electricity came in from the REA, 110 volt AC, what voltage were they run those refrigerators and all on the farms? Was it 32 volt? Does that sound familiar? No, none of you know? Well, as I recall, it wasn't the same, because when the farmer put in the REA, his refrigerator and all had to be replaced because the voltage was different on them. Because they used those Delco units, and some of them were wind, and some had an engine that ran and charged batteries. Any of you recall all that? That the farms had. I think those were 32 volt. I think there's something wrong. There's something wrong with it. It wasn't compatible. But here's my electrician right there. Yeah, I'm talking to him.
If they
So
ran on batteries, they'd be DC, and that wouldn't be compatible.
I just don't know. I can recall as a kid, I had 4 or 5 close friends that were farm boys, and I'd go out and stay at their farm. And one of them, there's 2 of them, that had an engine-driven Delco unit. And in the garage, they had rows of batteries, and we'd start that engine up and let it run during the day, and it'd charge those batteries, and then it'd shut off, and the batteries would run lights, some lights, and it would also run the refrigerator, and then if it got too low, we'd have to go start the engine up. And then the last one of those was around was a 4-cylinder engine about that long. Beautiful little 4-cylinder. 4-cylinder, real smooth running, and it was automatic. If the refrigerator came on, some way or another, it tripped it and it started up. It didn't have any batteries. It didn't have batteries. Because it was in the garage where it was sitting there, and it is, and almost burned, scare you half to death when it started up. Yeah.
Do you know when rural electrification came about around here?
After World War II. Any of you recall when REA came in? It was after World War II. Yeah, say 1947, 8, someplace right in there. Yeah, yeah. The main problem was the electric companies would not put in the wiring, too expensive to the farms, and so the farmers couldn't get electricity down their road, and so the government passed an act, the REA Act, which supplied money to put in the lines. That's right. And then because the electric companies wouldn't do it, frankly. So that's where that REA comes from. It's one of those programs that, can you imagine being a farmer without electricity? The milking machines, electric lights, air conditioning, water pumps for indoor plumbing with a water pump, and oh my goodness. Talk about a big change in life. That would make a terrific difference in farm life when that REA came in. Yes. But that was about right. I'd have to look it up, but that's about the right time. Okay, our time's up. Yeah. Oh, one more thing. Will you help me find my car in the parking lot when we leave? Okay, thank you.
I didn't know there were that many talented people and families in one small place.
Oh,
I
a
think we
lot.
found
McCune's
out
full of family people.
full of them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's give another hand, please, to Richard Weathers.
Thank you.
Wow. I think we all learned more about this town than any of us, even those who came from McCune, for goodness sake, knew about it to begin. Again, we need to thank the speakers. The programs here are so important because that's where we get our information besides the wonderful exhibits. So we'd like to start with Dick Roniker,
Yeah.
his expertise in
He's number one.
railroads, his history, what he's collected, what he's given to us and other libraries is invaluable. So Dick, thank you very much for that really good presentation. Then we followed that up with Kent Smith,
Yep.
who, the founding of McCune, he gave us a really good background, articles and photographs and background of the town. And then now we have the storyteller, and Richard, who gave that personal touch. Those stories are so important. We have David Wallace now who's recording these. So we have them saved so you can kind of go back and revisit them. So thank you a lot for coming for these programs. I'm going to ask Morgan to come up here for a second so she can maybe talk a little bit about whatever she wants to talk about. While she's doing that, the people here at Miners Hall Museum really want to have a coal camp exhibit and a host for Cherokee. And we really want to highlight and feature Cherokee. So what we do is need your help. If you know anyone who we could even contact, you know, who might have an interest, or who might want to host, or who might want to do a program, if you'll call the office here, that will be invaluable to us, because we really want, you know, Cherokee to be a part of this on the cycle coming up. So keep that in mind, and thank you again. We're going to have refreshments coming up. Thank you, Richard, very much. And Morgan, you ready to come up here and say a few words?
I think so.
Morgan, you wanna pick up that mic just?
I'd love to, dude.
It's on. Thank you.
That work?
Yeah.
Okay. As she just said, my name is Morgan Blanchard Zimmer. I am the current director of the McCune Osage Township Library and Museum. I took over the museum a year ago after Roy Parsons, who started the museum, passed away unexpectedly. I was thankful enough to train with Roy and learn quite a bit from Roy before taking over. And then last year we had a water and mold issue, so we have redone the front part of the museum. This little exhibit that we have here is just a scratch of the surface of what all we do have in the museum, and we do hope that you guys would come and partake. We plan on doing some future events. The museum is open the same days and hours as the library, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9:30 to 6, Wednesdays from 2 to 6, and Saturdays 9 to 1. And I would really like to say thank you to all of the Miners Hall Museum staff and trustees and volunteers for asking the McCune Museum to come and do these presentations and have an exhibit here. We've really enjoyed it. I would like to thank Dick Roniker, if he wouldn't mind standing up for a second. Dick. And give him a round. Dick was my first volunteer that was willing to take on the project with me and help me collect a few pieces of the railroad for our exhibit here. Kent Smith is also my right-hand man lately here at the museum. If Kent would like to stand, he goes beyond just doing the presentation. He volunteers his time for the library and the museum and helps write an article in our monthly newsletter called the Neighborhood Newsletter. And then Mr. Richard Weathers, which I was thankfully introduced to through Kent. Thank you, if you don't mind standing too, Kent, for this. So if you guys don't mind giving Kent a round of hand, we really appreciate it. So, and thank you all for coming to these presentations. It means a lot to see everyone here and to engage with the community and have this time. So thank you all.